Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is John Williams. I just want to give a shout out to the festival. Thank you for coming out to this event and to all the events at the festival. It's been a great festival. I've been really impressed with the authors, and we got another great panel for you. Many of the sessions have been taped, so if there's something you wanted to see that you missed, please check that out. We got a lot of good stuff tomorrow. We've got the classes in context. Kevin Brockmeyer's tomorrow at 6:30. Maureen Corrigan's at 8. So please come and check those out too. But for now, it's my privilege to host this conversation with Sean Greer and Justin Torres. And again, thank you for coming, and thanks especially to the Dr. Elizabeth Fletcher, the Sean Charitable Trust for sponsoring this session. Sean Greer's novels include The Confessions of Max Tivoli, The Story of a Marriage, and The Impossible Lives of Greta Wells. In 2017, he introduced us to Arthur Less, in the process winning a little thing called the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I said Pulitzer, but it's actually Pulitzer, as his character, Robert Brownberg, makes it quite clear in Less. Andy brings us more Arthur Less in his latest Less is Lost. The original Less took Arthur around the world. Less is Lost renames Arthur Archie, but it keeps him closer to home as he travels through the southern United States trying to keep his relationship intact and his house off the market. If you've not read these books, do yourself a favor and go get them. I can assure you that Arthur Less and his friends are very fun company. Justin Torres' first book, We the Animals, is a polished gem of a novel. It was a coming-of-age tale that captures the wildness and terror of youth, and it won the VCU Cabell First Novelist Award, among other accolades. Now Justin is back with Blackouts, which you can see on the stage next to him. I was blown away by this book. It interweaves lost history, fiction, and art in a truly innovative way. And in the process it asks whether, as Justin writes, we can undo erasure by more erasure. Blackouts doesn't come out till October 10th, but we've got it for sale here, and I highly recommend you buy a copy. And it's already been longlisted for the National Book Award. The short list comes out next week, so we hope to see Justin on it. And it just so happens that this is Justin's very first public appearance talking about Blackouts, so we're in for a special treat. So please join me in offering a warm welcome to Sean Greer and Justin Torres.
This is so fun to be here. Thanks for doing this, John.
Thank you for coming. We are excited to have you. Thank you.
We didn't plan our outfits either. This is...
I was going to say, because actually we had talked about wearing something totally different, and then both didn't choose to do it, and then wore the same thing anyway. Except this jacket, I'm very proud of, because the main comment I get on it is, I love your jacket. Did you make it yourself?
I understand you got to do some shopping in Little Rock here today.
I did. I went to the Crying Weasel and met Alex, who then told me I should get a cocktail. I guess I looked like I needed a cocktail at the Capitol. I just went on a quick tour of Little Rock with my friend Peg, but the Crying Weasel was fantastic. And has a weird hallway in the back with mylar and lights that's sort of scary. Is it for Instagramming? Okay.
Well, I'm glad you got to see some Little Rock, and thank you for being here. So, Justin, I want to begin with you, and I want to talk about kind of the title Blackouts and how that features into the book. I mean, Blackouts has so many meanings within the book. The protagonist literally suffers from blackouts. Much of the novel is set in a blacked out room, and I think most prominently the book centers around an old medical text that has redactions on every page. So tell us a little bit about the meaning of the title and what you're doing with the book more generally.
Yeah, so I guess to like set it up a little bit, the narrator is a young man in his 20s, and he goes to see a much older man who's on his deathbed in the desert, and they just kind of talk to each other in this room, and it's very hot, and they keep the curtains closed, hence the kind of blackouts that you were mentioning, this enclosed dark space that they're in. The narrator is also suffering these blackouts, and I think that the blackouts that he's suffering from have to do with like this, the feeling of being overwhelmed by what's happening in front of you, right? That sometimes you black out, you lose time, you don't record memory as a kind of defense against the too muchness of the world. And so that's happening to him. And then there's also it's a difficult book to describe. There's also this medical text at the center, which was a study that took place in the 1930s about, it was called Sex Variance, Study in Homosexual Patterns. And it's a lot about deviance, and so the Juan is trying to tell the narrator the story of this study, how it came about, and trying to get him interested in queer history and other histories as well. Yeah,
That's great.
It is an honor to be here at one of the first times where you're describing your book to
Yeah,
other people,
it's
you know?
a struggle. Yeah.
So the
Because there's a lot of elements in the book, yeah.
the text itself, it's so fascinating how you're unearthing this history, which is really not known, and then putting it in a fictional context. It kind of engages that history in a new way. Tell us a little bit about your just journey of finding this material and shaping it into a work of fiction.
Yeah, so the book came into my life. I was working in a bookstore, and there was I got this box of books donated to the store, and they were almost entirely queer novels and other texts from, pre-Stonewall books before the 1960s. And a lot of stuff I'd recognized, like Gide or Jean Genet, or The Well of Loneliness. But this medical text I'd never seen before. And what happened was there were these participants who came, and they gave their personal histories, their family histories, their sexual histories, and somebody transcribed them with real care in this kind of first-person vernacular. And then there's this overlay of pathology that's very what you'd expect from the 1930s, right? About trying to cure homosexuality and talking about this kind of social disease. And so there's two things happening at once. One of them is just this fascinating history that seems like it's coming from a kind of first-person testimony. And then the other is this very disturbing medical history. And so, I don't know, I didn't know, I knew I wanted to do something with it, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, right? It's the book is a lot about stigma and shame. It's also a page turner and really fun to read.
That is true. That is true. That is not just a plug. That is true. That is, and the redactions. How did you redact that text? Did you find it redacted like the characters do in the book?
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe I don't know if you can see from this distance, but there are photocopied pages in the book of redacted text. I did do that myself. Yeah. I haven't decided whether or not I wanted to keep that ambiguous or admit to it, but I just did.
Got you on record here, and you could maybe not reveal it in future appearances.
Keep it quiet, guys. I did do that myself, and I think that my first impulse, again, was to write these stories. I wanted to make every participant in the study, because there are photographs of them naked and their faces are blurred out, and I wanted to return to them some individuality, right? They'd been kind of erased and anonymized and made into just these pathological subjects, and I wanted to make them characters and people. I had that impulse, that kind of recuperative impulse. And and also I was just no, I don't know, they are anonymous, and maybe there's something else I can do with this text. I have words, I don't actually have people, and so one day I just started playing around and just getting rid of all the stuff that I found really objectionable, just blacking it out, and then what was left was a kind of erasure poem, and then I started to do it more deliberately and really shape these kind of erasure poems. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Andy, let's talk a little bit about Arthur Less and where he is.
Sounds like a totally different book.
I think that's safe to say. But Less, in terms of titles, Less is obviously such a pithy title, and it promises all the comedy that you bring with the book. Now we've got Less is Lost. So just tell us how Less got to where he was and why he's lost.
Happy to. I also think it's, of course, the process is it's of course really interesting for me too, because they're similar. It's the same thing of of sitting and being like, here are the things that I'm attracted to. I'm going to gather them together, and I'm going to freak out that I don't know how this is going to be a work of art, but also trust myself that I can make it into something. And which is why it's so interesting to hear you talk about these various pieces and how they come together. And then I'm also, maybe I'll ask you later, or like when you realized the metaphor of the blackout was all connected, that you knew they did connect in your brain and it was a novel. I would guess my segue is to like, that's what I did, I guess. I didn't know I was writing a sequel to Less. It was in 2016 after the presidential election, and however you feel about it, I think we were surprised. And I thought, and there was a sort of narrative that people like me who were fighting for Hillary Clinton had discounted a lot of the country and didn't understand it. And I was like, humility is a place I'm very comfortable in. I will go there. And in fact, I'm gonna rent a van and go to the parts of the country I've never been to, and I'm gonna go to small towns, and I'm gonna go to dive bars, and I'm gonna take notes, and I'm gonna not talk about politics and just see what I learn. And I rented a van to go to the Southwest, and I spent 3 weeks there, and then a year later I rented a van and I went to, I guess, what I would have called the Deep South, whatever that means. And I made it to Arkansas briefly, but not to Little Rock, because I didn't go to big towns. I only went to little places. And I spent 3 weeks going all around in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana.
How'd you make it to Muscle Shoals? I just got to ask that.
I made it to I didn't know what my plans were. And so out of Atlanta, I was like, that's where I rented the van. I was like, I'm gonna head to Alabama. I've never been there. And I spent a night I just ended up in the north. There were too many big towns in the south, you know? I didn't want to go to Birmingham. I didn't want to hit the big stuff. And it looked funny up there. And someone's like, you should go to Muscle Shoals. Now, I didn't know that was an important place for music or anything. But I did go to a bar there called, I can't remember, even though I put it in my book. I'll remember it in a second. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Stagger Lee. And that's a good name, right? And it was like one of those places that's like all the windows are totally blacked out, like it was previously a muffler shop or something, and like, or a gay bar, which is similar. You don't know what's gonna be in there when you open the door. So I was like, here we go. And I went in and there were just a bunch of people at the bar drinking Bud Light, and I just tried to play it through for a couple hours until they got drunk, and I wrote down everything they said, and I put it word for word in the novel.
Well, it sounds like there's a Blackouts connection there, at least the way.
Yes. Well, anyway, I took notes on all this stuff, and I had a different idea for a book that I was working on. It changed in that year between the two. I wrote a different book with different characters on a road trip, and it was just terrible. You know, it was like one of those awful first drafts. I wrote 100 pages and threw it away, and I knew inside of me, I was like, I know what I really want to do. And I thought, well, if there's anything good to do after you win a Pulitzer Prize is write any book you want to. So I'm going to put Arthur Less back in, because I have these characters. I could tell what characters I needed, and I already had them in the book. So I was like, I'll just do it again. It seems like a good way for me to filter my experience through this character who is something like me, but not very much. It was very useful in Less. And so I did it again in this one, and I was forced to make comedy out of situations that were not very funny to me while I were in them. Like that bar was not a funny experience to me. But once I read it back, it seems funny, you know? Or, you know, I visited 3 different enslavement plantations in 3 different places, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I can't not use it. And I was like, this isn't comedy material. What do I do? And I was only when I went to the Frogmore plantation in Mississippi that I realized what was funny were all the white people on the tour and their expectations of how the tour was going to go. And so that too, I wrote down exactly the tour that I took. And that's the whole thing about comedy, is finding out what's funny, and it's me every single time, you know? And I think the reader's comfortable with me being humiliated, and I'm comfortable with it. So it it somehow works. And I got to get to some of the hard stuff I was working through and thinking about the United States. And now I'm talking about, it was a serious project for me doing it. But the reader won't really know that when they read it, because I've tried to process it for them so that they'll be tricked into reading what's kind of a political book and think it's a fun road trip with a pug, which it is.
Arthur Less is such an endearing character, and I wouldn't presume that Arthur Less is you, but he also is not necessarily the joke, but he always seems to be in a situation that makes it more funny. Talk more about that character and just how you develop that character.
I mean, it seems like it's me because, like, look, I had to, for this cover, the same artist did it. I don't know if I can tell this joke again. I can say these words. And he sent me, I was like, it looks great, but he was really old. He's only like 6 months older in this book, but he'd lost a lot of hair, and he had like a really out-of-fashion mustache. And I wrote back, I was like, I love it, but could you make him more fuckable? Like, is it impossible at 51? Is it just not possible? And he wrote back, he's like, I've never had anyone ask me of that before. I would be happy to do that. And I think he's more fuckable. He's lonely, but because I want that, because I want him to be lovable. I don't want him to be, like, you take total pleasure in his pain, though I took great pleasure, because I would just sit and think, what's the worst thing I could do? Can I dip him in mud? Can I set him on fire? Can I make him accidentally take drugs and end up on a platform over a canyon? Like, that was my experiment with it, is like, what's the worst thing I could do to him? The idea being that if I really, really torture him, then I can reward him later. And I can hopefully produce a sense of joy on the page, which is kind of hard to do, which was my project in Less. I had a student, it was at the Fox in Iowa City. We were having some drinks, and he was like, I don't think you can write a novel about joy. And I'm like, sure you can. More drinks, more stupid talking. And I'm like, I'm gonna do it and prove it to you. So I proved it to him, I guess. Yeah. But anyway, so that's what the torture's about. And he's distant from me now. I don't feel like I'm very much like him anymore. Maybe because, like, I've evolved past some of his particular issues of love and loneliness, but also because if he was too much like me, I don't think I would love him. Not that I'm not a narcissist, but narcissists, we don't necessarily love ourselves. We just think we're the most important people on the planet. But him, like, I really wanted to things to turn out well for him, So he in that way started distance from him, and the narrator, I feel, is more like me, sounds like me. Yeah.
Is there a third Less book?
But I'm not writing one right now.
You're not.
Because my agent was like, don't you do that. That's all you'll ever be. Yeah. I'm like, I'd be happy with that. Is that so bad?
There's something really comforting about the trilogy as well. Like, there's something about, I don't know. I want a third. I think you should do it.
You think?
I encourage you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I would sort of like pass. There must be a sports term when you have a ball and you send it to another player. And I want to do that to myself, future self, and win that sports event.
Well, Less is Lost obviously connects to Less, and I wanted to ask you about Blackouts and its connection to We the Animals. We the Animals has an unnamed narrator. This narrator is in his youth. The narrator in Blackouts obviously is a little bit older, shares some characteristics, on my reading at least, with the narrator of We the Animals. Is there a connection? Is there a conscious connection?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think that, like, kind of similarly, I write a persona that is similar in a lot of ways to myself. There's a lot of kind of biographical overlap between the narrator in We the Animals and the narrator in Blackouts with my own biography. But it's fiction. It's not me. I think that We the Animals ends with the well, I don't know. Probably a lot of you haven't read it, but it's been out for 12 years, so I'll just spoil it. But it ends with like the character being institutionalized, and Blackouts kind of begins with a character who has been institutionalized and is, 10 years out from that experience. And so I think any reader who's read them would see a very clear connection. But the books are so incredibly different. They could not be more different. And that was the most important thing to me, was to try and just become a different writer. Like I wanted to write a completely different book. And I didn't. I feel like I kind of got some tricks with We the Animals, and I didn't really want to keep doing them, But yeah, I don't know. It was nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking to do that. It took like a lot of time, and I was incredibly neurotic. And I tried to get the book back, like after it was in the pipeline, like in publication. Like I called my editor and I said, "No, you have to stop." And she said, "You would have to pay us. Like you would have to pay us." And I was like, "Okay, never mind. We'll go ahead." But I was really, really terrified of just kind of falling on my face, because I knew that I'd like stretched to the absolute limit of what I could do.
But are you starting to feel like maybe it's going to be okay?
I mean, the National Book Award thing. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, that's changed. It wasn't literally until that morning that I felt like, oh, maybe it's going to be okay. Because the early reviews weren't, I read them and I was like, that's fair. Like the really, really early ones, like Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, whatever, they're not raves.
But do you feel like you know yet what you actually wrote?
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, that's one of the things that like this again, being my very first time talking about this book in public, it is, you learn, right? Like you learn from the questions people ask. You learn from being kind of forced to narrate the book and the project of the book, and you start. I mean, a little bit is you start to tell a lie, right? Because what really happens is chaos, right? Like you're just alone with your thoughts, and you're just trying to get something out of nothing. And some days it works, and other days it doesn't, and you don't remember which days were which, right? Like, but as you start to tell the story, you start to realize what was going on that you were blind to, And so I'm hopeful that as I continue to talk about it, I will make more sense.
The way readers receive it is often a little bit different from certainly the book you planned at the very beginning sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, in good and bad ways.
Yeah. I mean, with Less is Lost, do you find that you're having the kind of political conversations that you were hoping to spark?
I mean, I think also my own stage persona, which you're seeing, is so goofy that I end up making it into a super goofy, fun time with Andy Greer. Read my book about a pug in a camper van, you'll love it. And that's how they respond to it. And so it's a safer place for me to be, is to talk about in those terms and talk about the places I went to, like sort of tell stories about Staggerly or like the commune I stayed at in Arizona, and just tell the stories rather than talk about the more vulnerable things, like what went wrong? How did it turn from this into this? Like, why make fiction out of real experience? What's the point of that? And that's harder to talk about. And I'm not even sure if anyone cares. You're here for a good time, and I think both of our books are here to provide that, and also some spinach in it. Because it's like, we usually sit with really hard stuff. Yeah. And it sounds like you certainly did.
Yeah. And I feel the same way. I enjoy, like We the Animals is not a fun book, but I would go out on tour and I would enjoy just making jokes and just being in a room with people and having them laugh, and and then people who would buy the book in an event and then write to me and be like, "You're so fun. Why?" And I'm like, oh, I'm also really sad. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And for whatever reason, I think when in my work, it's a very different persona than me in that way, right? Like the narrators are very much kind of thinking about struggle and how hard it is to be alive at times. And I don't know. Yeah, that's where I end up in the page. And I think in life, I want to be goofy.
Here we are before you, two goofy gay men with
Wearing matching outfits.
with identical pants.
Goofy men, but men who obviously have read a lot, and I think that comes out in your books. And I wonder if I could ask you about just allusions in your books and kind of what has influenced you. Justin, you refer in particular to writers like Manuel Puig. Andrew, your books are studded with references to Homer, Melville, Proust. Talk about those influences and how they work their ways into your books.
I absolutely just steal and imitate and copy a lot, and in these books in particular, because the narrator is a high school English teacher, part of the fun is I get to make the most pretentious references, thinking no one will ever get this, and then if they do, like that's part of the fun of it, is that I get to thread it through with something with the traditions. You know, like in this one in particular, I reread a lot of American classics. You know, like I couldn't read James Fenimore Cooper. That's unreadable. Not just for like racist reasons, but because like I can't read it. Like it's nonsense on the page. And I read like Washington Irving but Melville. I had such a great time with Moby Dick that I used a quote on the cover because no one told me it was a comedy. Like I'd read it before in high school and it was super serious, but it's a hoot and a half, and you can skip parts. And so I would just. It's also like. You're alone in your room with all the books, and they're your friends carrying you through what you're writing. So it's fun to like bring them to the party.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I steal, and the Puig reference is Kiss of the Spider Woman, which is a classic of kind of Latin American literature, and it's about two men in a room. They're in prison. One of them has been imprisoned for being queer in Argentina. The other's been in prison for being a revolutionary. It's in the 70s. And they just tell each other stories. And Molina, the queer character, narrates these stories in the form of films. And I had these two characters in a room, and I like reread Kiss of Spider-Woman, and it occurred to me, I was like, oh my God, I could just steal this. And so there's it's an homage. It's like the book is very clear that it's an homage, but they just start telling the story of this sex variant study in the form of a movie, and they're telling each other movies, and there's something really sweet and intimate about that dynamic that, I don't know, I loved revisiting Puig in that way, and then thinking about other writers who've written about Puig, and and just stealing on. Another text I stole from was Pedro Páramo, because the opening page of this book is basically just the opening page of Pedro Páramo, which I chose these kind of big texts in Latin American literature because Juan is Puerto Rican, and he's very literary. He's read everything, and he's constantly trying to get this narrator to process his life through literature. And so there's like endless allusions. There are footnotes in the back. It's like that. It's like there's so many allusions. But it doesn't feel like homework, I swear, guys. I swear it doesn't feel like homework.
Well, I mean, when you love books, and the person reading it probably loves books. It's fun to put other books. I also stole from Melville. I took a whole I got one of my characters ended up in Maine, and I was like, I'm gonna just put a whole paragraph that's just literally Melville, and what fun! They head across the wild Penobscot, or like literally the paragraph. And my editor was trying to edit it, and I was like, actually, you can't edit that. That's not mine.
Talk a little bit about how you decided to structure these books. I find them both formally interesting in different ways. I mean, yours it reads as a third person, at least at the beginning, Les does, but it soon becomes apparent it's first person, and part of the mystery is who is this narrator who knows so much about Arthur Les, but who was in the book. And Justin, your book is obviously taking text and using your characters to comment on that text. And just wondering if you could kind of talk about how you all came to the formal decisions you did and why you wrote the books the way you did and structured.
Yeah, the structure, again, I was stealing from Pedro Páramo quite a lot because that book is about somebody who's been told to go visit the town of their father, and where they actually go is they go to like hell or purgatory or some liminal in-between space. And you don't realize it as you're reading it. It's a series of vignettes, and it's just like these dialogues that seem to come out of nowhere, and you're so disoriented the first time you read that book. And there's something about that disorientation that makes you feel like you're in a room full of ghosts. And it doesn't say that explicitly. It makes you feel that way. And I love that as a structural choice. And so my book is also like, it's a puzzle. Like for a while, you're just like, what? How do these pieces fit together? And then there are these documents and these photographs, and I wanted it to feel like you're just kind of in this room with these ghosts, right? With these real life people who existed, but who are kind of blurred, and you can't quite know what their stories are. And then also the experience of, like, I don't know if you've ever done any archival research, but like there's just a lot of ephemera, and so there'll be a photograph next to a letter, and you don't know the context for either, and you start to make up a story just because they're next to each other in an archive. And so the novel's also doing that. It's just putting images next to text, next to blacked out text, and just kind of encouraging or forcing you to make up some kind of connection there. Yeah.
I can't wait to read this. I haven't read it yet. It just really sounds amazing. Less is I think where I came up with the structure of the narrator, and I don't want to give it away if anyone hasn't read it. But the idea of a third-person narrator, an omniscient narrator who actually is a first person, who is actually speaking in first person, is not mine alone. I stole that also. I mean, Nabokov does that. But I had a specific reason for it that I can't tell you if you haven't read the book. But it's a way to get away with everything, so that you can do all the omniscient stuff and go into the mind of the character. You can go miles above, and then you can also say, like, I remember the first time I met Arthur Less, and tell like a first-person story. And so I got, which is more intimate with the reader. It draws them in closer. So I got to, like a sort of film student who decides to do everything they learned in class in one movie. And it was so fun. It was so liberating. And that's part of, I think, why I wanted to write another book with that same voice, because it was such a great way of, also, if it's a character who looks a lot like me, who's the main character, I don't want to write that character in first person. I want to sit outside them. And it was a nice way to do it. And I want to be able to critique them and make fun of them in a loving way. And only an outside narrator could do that, because first person would just be so self-pitying. Especially because I found it really hard always to write with a gay man as a protagonist, because I'm grappling with the history of this in literature, which is always sad, and particularly like the gay white man self-pitying, which is sort of feels so dated and inappropriate that I can slide into it so easily. So I had to find another way into it, and so that was that format. And so Less is Lost, I think, was also, the structure seems, you would hardly notice there is one when you're reading it, hopefully, because I polished it really smooth to make it so you would never notice. But like, I threw out 2 chapters after the book was due in the same sort of panic, and it was like 45 pages. Like, he was supposed to he had a chapter in the Midwest, he was in the Northwest, and I cut them all out, because only at the last minute could I see that the book, and this sounds so stupid when I say it, I was like, oh, it's a cross-country trip. It wasn't like a year and a half ago, but like, I got rid of it because I was like, I'm gonna make him go everywhere in the US, and I'm gonna mention every state, and it wasn't that. Sometimes you only get to the hilltop where you can see where the novel really stands, and where you can make those easy decisions of cutting things out and adding something in, and you see what the pattern is, and you're like, oh, I had a big bird scene there, so I'm gonna do another bird scene at the end, so it sort of echoes in the book. And that's a really wonderful place to be. And in this book, it only happened during the page proofs, which is where they have printed out the pages for you, exactly the way they're going to look, and they say, please don't make any major changes because we've laid it out perfectly. And I've published enough books that I ignored that.
Yeah, I got in a little bit of trouble for making big changes at that stage. Yeah, but I also ran up against that problem of I mean, you called it self-pity and just a certain kind of melancholy. And I think that one of the fun things about this book is that the character of Juan he's just another generation. He has a really camp sensibility, and for him, the kind of cardinal sin is not to be able to laugh at yourself. And so he's talking to this narrator, and he's constantly teasing him and kind of poking him and just trying to get him to think. I mean, to think about the deep stuff, but also to think about the connections to history and then also like the cosmic joke of it all, right? That you have to be able to laugh at yourself. Like that's the kind of the end goal of, I don't know, being on this earth, I guess. Yeah.
Andy, you have this character, Finley Dwyer, and he's sort of like Les's tormentor, right? At one point, he pulls Les aside and clues him in that he's not in the canon, which Les thinks is artillery. And he thinks he shouldn't be getting awards because he's a bad gay, is what he tells him. So, I mean, is there such a thing as that? Comment on that a little bit, and where do these books fit in on the contemporary discourse of gay literature?
I think we're both bad gays, probably. But I, all the time on Instagram or like at a party or something, a gay man will come up to me and say, I know what you mean, I'm a bad gay too. But actually, I don't know what I mean. I think what I mean in the sense of like, I think a good gay would be the one who reads all the books in the canon and has watched the correct movies so that they can get all the jokes at the party and is doing everything correctly. And any artist is going to be a bad gay because they're going to question it or be too weird for that situation or not watch RuPaul's Drag Race past season 3, which I haven't. I'm sorry, everybody. I got tired of it. Once they had too much money, it wasn't interesting anymore. And so, and I'm not much of a joiner, and I think like a lot of people, like the group that you find yourself in, you sit and think like, is this really my group? Well, I guess it is, because I'm a gay man, but I don't always feel comfortable like in a gay bar, certainly, until I found the weird gay bars. You know, it's like it. So I think for Arthur, like he is not comfortable in his own skin, and also as a writer, because I think he's not doing the right things you're supposed to do as a gay writer in the books. I mean, you reward the heroes and you punish the villains, but I think in a gay book sometimes you punish the heroes, which is unpleasant. And I think that's what he's being accused of, but he doesn't understand it. And then in this book, I decided to bring Finley Dwyer back because I put Arthur on he's the judge of basically the National Book Awards. he's on the jury with his nemesis, and they have all these meetings where they say these ridiculous things to each other about how they're going to decide the winner. And I think it doesn't give it away that he's thrown off the committee at one point eventually. Because I was on the National Book Award committee once myself, and it was crazy.
I want to hear more about that.
We all just betrayed each other and lied, but we didn't get to name a long list or a short. We came out with a short list, and so a long list would have been better for all of us because we all had things we were fighting for. I lost every battle. None of my books have represented my year.
Yeah. I mean, I judged a huge award that was like $50,000, and it was a real glimpse into how these things work, and the compromise books that you get, and yeah. But whatever, you won.
Whatever, you're on the list. I guess that sometimes they're right. Or
certainly like, for the Pulitzer.
Sometimes you're the compromise book. That's how it turns out. I sometimes think about that because there was 3 judges on the Pulitzer committee. I'm like, and I then I knew who the other finalists were, and I'm like, so how did it? did they really choose my, like, how did they end up there? It's like, I'm the only one they could all agree on? Or like, were they all felt strongly? Or like, I'll never know, or I'll find myself in a bar getting drunk with all three of them and I'll find out. Do I want to know?
Yeah, I told Andrew this in the green room, but 2011, the year that We the Animals came out, that was the only year in the history of the Pulitzers that they decided no book was worthy of the prize. And they just didn't award one to anyone. Yeah.
But both of your last books were critically acclaimed. Obviously, you had the award, and I wonder what that did in terms of creating pressure for these next books. Maybe the pressure came from your editor, maybe it came from the market, maybe it came from yourself. Did that change the way you approached how you went about writing?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, like I had this insane experience where I got incredibly lucky with my first book, and I was invited to do a lot of things, and suddenly I was like asked to be an expert on Latinx literature or queer literature or all of these things and it was like 2 months ago, if you'd seen me, you'd be like, are you okay? Do you need a sandwich? Like, you know, and then like suddenly it's like, here I am, like, you know, like Mr. Torres pontificating. And I felt like I just had to catch up with that expectation. I felt like I hadn't read enough, you know, to be expounding on the things I was being asked to expound on. And so I was just like, I'm gonna take a long time. And luckily I had an editor who was like, okay, take a long time. She's like, you could not take a long time and capitalize on this moment, but if you're gonna take a long time, take a long time. And so I did, and I you know, I also was like suddenly middle class. Like until 30 years old, I never had health insurance. Like everything was precarious every day of my life. And then suddenly I was like being offered a fellowship at Harvard and like a job at UCLA. And so there was just all this catching up that I was doing. It's kind of class jumping, and it was just spun my head around. And I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna read a lot. I'm gonna read a lot so that I feel kind of commensurate to what's being asked of me the next time I go out. Yeah.
That sounds really hard. That sounds really wise.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah. I mean, I think that sounds really wise. I think I was in a completely different but lucky position in that, like, I think a lot of people will introduce me and say, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his debut novel, Les. And I'm like, this is my 6th book. I don't say that if it happens. I'm like, yeah, I'm brand new. Just wrote this book. I don't know how it happened. But I wrote this book because I felt like a total failure. No one was reading me, and so it didn't matter what I would write. I was going to write a comedy, even though nobody wanted that, and I was going to tell all the humiliating things that ever happened to me because no one was ever going to read it, and it didn't matter. And then everybody read it, the last thing I expected, and it didn't throw me off that much because I had written other books, and this was a book that I was like, oh, I'll just do it again. In a way, I was like, I'll do exactly, I kept trying to get back to the feeling of making exactly the book I wanted and not caring, which is a little harder this time because I was aware there would be readers who would know the characters, which is a weird feeling to have. But it was the pandemic, so it's not like I was in contact with other people. You know, it was me and some Negronis and the book, and you know, like, that's how it happens. No, I got to indulge myself. I kept doing, when I wrote last, I just kept thinking, what's the most fun thing you could do? And I'd be like, I want illustrations before every chapter. And my editor was like, no, we don't do that with serious fiction. I'm like, you are with this one. I'll find the illustrator. I'll get them all. So like I did it all myself. I designed the cover. I wrote the back copy. You know, I did all the stuff. I was like, I'm gonna do what's fun. I made like sleep masks that, you know, for travel, and on Etsy, and I sent it to my editor, and I was like, I'm doing the promotion for it, you know, and I tried to keep that sense of fun, just the fun of the process and not caring if it sold, because I wrote this thinking, they don't sell anyway, so why not do what you want? For Less is Lost, and I think I was able to keep, it was a little hard to do, but not being in contact with my editor or New York very much helped a lot, so I just like tried to have a blast, and I got the illustrations inside again, and I made little car air fresheners for the shaped like a moose that I sent to my editor, and she's like, "Is this for my birthday? What is this?" I was like, "No, it's for the book. You can make them on Etsy. We should hand them out." She's like, "We're not going to do that." I was like, "I'll do it." So I tried to keep that, but that was the.
Does it smell like a moose?
No, I got it in two scents. One is unscented for those who won't, and the other one was new car. No, it wasn't. I'm sorry, we tried new car and it was too new car. It was a road trip. So it was kind of like old bananas. You know, on a road trip, you should not buy bananas because they're in the car with you? They really nailed it. So I still have some. You can write me, I'll send it to you.
We would love that. I know we've got a perceptive and engaged audience out there. I think we might have some audience questions, so I want to open it up for anyone who might have a question. Fred, come on down.
Love a hot mic. So,
That's a good drag king name.
I like that actually. Yeah. Okay, so I have been playing around with this question in my head all weekend, and I still don't think that I've nailed it, but I'm going to try and pose something around what I've been thinking about. So, and both of you guys kind of talked about it in various ways tonight, thinking about gay letters and what gay letters look like. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how, after 2011, it feels like gay life has changed in some radical way, and it doesn't feel like you have the opportunity to express gay trauma in the same way. I feel like pre-2011, gay lit was like Andrew Holleran. And like post-2011, Andrew Holleran isn't really like anybody's tea. So what strategies have you guys come up with to push past that? What do you think gay lit will look like in, say, 10, 20 years? Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So, please.
Wow. I'm glad you did a lot of reading.
I mean, I think it's an excellent question. I think it's an excellent question. I think
The man who brought us here, by the way.
I think that, I mean, one of the things, I think 2011, I think you're referring to like gay marriage, right? And I think that one of the things that happens in that moment, right, it's like this kind of constant filtering experience through deviance and stigma and shame, right? Which is like there's this very clear way in which society is telling you, you know, you are not normal, right? Your desires aren't normal. Your ambitions for yourself are not normal. And so the literature reflects that. And I think that at that time also, I think that there's a new generation coming up that's actually just like, can we talk about joy? Can we talk about queer joy? Like, can anybody, please? Like, I would love a book that's joyful, you know? And I think that both things can happen, right? Because we need more joy. I'm not gonna write that book. like Andrew's gonna write that book.
Don't say that now. You have a long career ahead of you. You could have a breakdown like I did and turn into a comedian.
But we need it. Like, we need it. We need this kind of plethora, right? Like, we need this variety in the literature in tons of ways, not just in terms of affect, right? But in all kinds of diversity we need. And so I think that's I think it's a lovely problem to have. I don't think that you turn away from the fact that if you're looking for queer ancestry, if you're looking towards the past, you're gonna bump up against a lot of suffering and a lot of stigma and you can't pretend that, right? Like, I couldn't write historical fiction about these people in this time because I don't know, all I had access to was this study of deviance, right? Like, and so like, there's got to be a way to engage with that is interesting, rewarding, but isn't like turning away from that history either, because yeah, there's been a lot of change, but you have to look backward at the same time as you're looking forward, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing is that certainly the idea of like gay male fiction may dissolve into other ways of being and may seem too limited a point of view. And I mean, it makes me think of my generation of gay white men. I've had like, I've watched, I wouldn't say my friend group, but a lot of men struggling with the trauma they went through, not only of coming out and the suicidal ideation, but of living through the AIDS pandemic and losing friends, and being thought of as oppressed people, and then many of them wealthy Manhattanites being told that they're people of privilege. They have struggled to accept that as truth. And that's not a very attractive thing. And it often comes out in doubling down on an Andrew Holleran-ness. And I think that's what I was saying, that it's been hard for me to write a novel, because that it's sort of like a story told many times within culture in a certain way, so that it gets in a rut, and there's only one way to talk about it. I mean, in Less, I have one paragraph where he talks about how he's the first homosexual ever to grow old, and he doesn't know what to do. And I make it sort of a funny line, and what he just says is that because all of the other men, generations above him, died, he's never seen a gay man grow old. Doesn't know how to do it. Like, that's a pretty awful thing to think about, right? But it's a different way to think about it than a poor me. It's trying to, that's what I was trying to do. But I also think, like, we're seeing other genres able to tackle these hard things like horror and science fiction. And maybe that's a way for queer people. I think it already is. Like, there's other ways in to this stuff. And I think what we're both doing is trying to find other ways in to the hard stuff and to the honesty and vulnerability, which I think is still necessary. But I also think, like, for joy, like, I was thinking, like, okay, we had a hard time, but like, we were out on the streets and we were just funnier than the other people. Like the AIDS, you know, we were terrified, but we had much funnier, you know, slogans. I remember like marching against the Gulf War. I was with ACT UP, and we would just keep shouting, "Fishnets, not fighter jets," you know, "U.S. out of the war," which doesn't make any sense, but it like makes the news. That was the tactic, and it was just to be funnier than the other side, and so you win. And I think that's what I drew on. Like, I remembered that, because I think it's easy to get very defensive and serious when you have suffered something, but you still have to open your heart to be an ally to everyone else. And I'm hoping that fiction can be open-hearted that way.
Anyone else? We have time for one more if you want. Yeah.
Well, I have a much more shallow question, so you
good.
won't have to think so hard. I really liked Arthur Lest. And when you did finally reward him and give him his joy, it made me cry. It was so sweet. So, but I have a question, and I have two thoughts about it, and I'll never forgive myself if I don't ask you what you were thinking. Why was everyone getting sick who were around?
People ask me that all the time. There's in the Germany chapter, people keep getting sick throughout and I don't have a good answer, except that was what was happening to me.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, like everyone I would come across would suddenly, the next day, they'd be like, "No, I feel like it's a hangover, but it seems to be lasting longer." Always the same symptom. I went to London, and like I was with a friend on the bus, and after about a couple hours, he's like, "I don't feel so well. I think you should go to this party without me. I'll send my wife." The wife came. A little while later, she's like, "Oh, I gotta go home." You know, it kept happening. I just thought, what am I doing? Like, I think I'm boring people to death. And so I gave it to Arthur that he thought his German was so bad that he was killing the people he was talking to, his students, his lover,
I love this German.
yeah, it was his German, his bad German, a language I do not speak.
We hung out last night, and I was very under the weather today.
I mean, I'm fine. See, I do it to people. But it's the symptom was a hangover that won't go away. Like, and it lasted always about a day. Yeah, harmless.
Got one more question before we close, because I want to ask you about some of the figures you encountered in your research and some of the creations in yours, Andy. You have so many great characters who aren't as major as Arthur Less or Robert Brownburn, but are still impactful. So I'm wondering if, Justin, you can talk a little bit about who you discovered in your research that you think people should really know about and they don't. And Andy, if you could talk a little bit about who one of your kind of favorite characters you created who is not the major character that Arthur Less is.
Yeah, I'll go first, so we can end with you because you're going to be funny. There's a figure called Jan Gay who is a real life woman who Juan Gay, the character in my book, takes it's his namesake. He takes his name after her, and she was a lesbian researcher and kind of activist, and she was just this amazing figure. She came out when she was 20. She was like in 1920. She just did all this research into lesbian lives, and she actually initiated what became the sex variant study. And basically, they took her research and turned the entire thing against her, and she was really, really crushed by the final product. And she gets written about a lot in this book, and she's just an amazing figure. I had a really hard time finding out anything about her. Even though she lived this fantastic life, she was a nudist, and she started a nudist colony in like upstate New York. She made a film about nudity, which you can watch on YouTube. It's really great. She like goes to all these nudist colonies like in Europe before the Second World War. She's just an amazing figure, and she kind of died in obscurity, and she's never really gotten her due. So I hope that like the book makes people curious about her, and I hope somebody like writes a book just about her, like a biography one day.
Can you say her name again?
Jan Gay. She changed her name to Jan Gay. Her real name was Helen Reitman. Her father was a very famous anarchist who was the lover of Emma Goldman, and he abandoned her. But she changed her name to Jan Gay because in the Midwest, this is my reading, but in the Midwest at the time that she was growing up, Jan was mostly a man's name, pronounced Jan, because there's the intense kind of Scandinavian roots in that region. And gay obviously was code. Like, gay meant gay to gays back then. It just didn't mean it to straight people. Like, they didn't know gay meant happy to them. But so like she changed her name to this gender ambiguous name and her last name to Gay, and her partner also changed her name to Xenia, which is a gender ambiguous name in Russian, to Xenia Gay. They're both characters in the book. It's fascinating history. I mean, you like dive into this stuff and you're like, wow, these people lived on the margins. They lived lives of radical reinvention, and poof, they kind of disappear because those kinds of histories just aren't taken down. Yeah.
Well, that sounds fascinating. I have a different answer to give because I have a different question to answer. But I think my first answer is the character H. Mandern, because he doesn't really appear in Less. He's too ill. You vaguely see him throwing up backstage. And then when I was doing Less, I wanted to make a kind of Don Quixote thing with the Less's Sancho Panza, and I wanted to invent an old man. I was like, oh, I got one. And so I put him in the book, and he was so fun to write. He was taking over the book that I really had to rein him in, because I just sat and thought of all the like classic great American writers that I met like long ago at like some conference, the sort of Russell Banks kind of characters and just how sort of arrogant and you know, full of themselves and angry that they weren't being acknowledged, and yet, you know, they were also kind once it fell away a little bit, but they were all battling with each other for who knows what, a Pulitzer Prize. And so it was fun to put him as a foil for Arthur, who's this totally nobody writer, to have this super famous writer stuck in a van together, traveling across. I just had really a good time, because finally I could have someone who would say, we are in the third age of man, the age of bronze. You know, he would says these stupid, crazy things. That was like, I don't get to write otherwise. That's why you have characters.
Andy and Justin, thank you for being here with us tonight. They'll be outside signing books. I hope you'll come buy the books, get it signed. Thank you again. Thank you for coming out.
Well, thank you, John, so much.